Rightio, hey, welcome back. Just a quick one for today, and it's more a sort of like an add-on to previous videos and discussions that we've had. I'm going to do a little dye trial today. I have been commissioned to make a very, very large wall hanging, and well, actually a replica of one that I've made I don't even know how many years ago. And the dye that I used back then was the old red, and as we all know, that one doesn't take on Harakeke anymore. So, you know, I really don't like taking on commissions that are that specific. I mean, size is one thing, color is quite another, especially now that the colors, as much as we try, but they're not as consistent as we would have liked them to be, so to speak. And so today is basically a trial of all different, because that back then that original wall hanging was in shades of blues and greens, and so I tried to replicate it and sort of upsize it by about 3 or 4 times. And so I'm using all but the terry dye in this one because it's going overseas. And the last thing I want is, and I don't know where it's going, like in terms of what type of wall and so on, and we know that terry has a tendency to fade. The last thing I want is having a massive wall hanging and half of the fenua inside are faded. So even though long term we don't know if the other dyes are better in terms of the fading issue, however, I have used all 3 and so far I haven't had any fading issue, but you know, it's only been a year since I've been using most of them, so 2 years really. So just bear that in mind. Anyway, so today what I'm trialing and show you is these ones. So there is the liquid Brit Dye More, and that's you know, that's the one that most people would be familiar with. Sorry, someone at the door. So this is the one that most people would be more familiar with because it for all intents and purposes it looks like the old red, right? So that's that one, and the other one I use is going to be the you know, basically the ones that I have in my shop are the dye poly, and I use the Kelly green and the blue, and then I'm going to use the basic dye also by Jacquard, the green and the blue, but I put some malahite and crystal violet in as well because I still got half a jar of these. And I think, so, you know, in the wall hanging, you know, a couple of highlights that aren't quite the same color might work well. I don't know yet. But that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to do a trial with all of them, and then show you the results. And yeah, I'm kind of hoping that they are similar but different. If you get my meaning. I mean, I have used all dye brands before, but I've never done, you know, all the same colors simultaneously. I have done the red ones, if you remember. I only took photos of those. I've done the I think it was the dye poly. They have a crimson red and the red, and I've done that as a sort of comparison. And plus the red, I didn't have the basic dye then. So, but today is all blues, all greens from all 3 brands. So hopefully that will give us a bit of a indication of what they really look like. See you there. Rightio. So this is the first lot. This is the red Dye More liquid, and that's the, I'll show you, the peacock green. Here we go. The peacock green in that pot, first one, and the sapphire blue in the second pot. So we're starting with the 2 liquid ones today, and then we move into the powdered ones later on. But so basically that's my setup. So I've got the pots, it's only about yay much water in there. On the gas burner outside, got my cold water there, got my rack out of sight. And so I do these two first, and then I do the next slot, which is probably the eye dye poly, and then I do the basic dye last. And we'll see, I put them on 3 different racks so we know the difference in colour once they're dry. Rightio, so just as I've shown this before, what I do is really pop them in and then like spaghetti. Roll them in. It needs to be a rolling dye, or a rolling boil rather. So if you have, these are dry, and I don't wet them down before. Some people do, I don't. I just use them straight out as they. And then, depending on how deep I want the colour to be, usually it doesn't take much. And in this instance, I want a couple of different shades for each colour, so I may put some in just a little bit shorter than the others. See, I like this. See, that's the green, and it just looks really stunning already. Out into the cold. Let's see. Normally I would do one colour at a time, but because I'm making so many today, and also there's rain on the forecast. There you go. This is a lovely blue. It's almost as good as the old blue that we used to have for it. So that's basically the process for all 3, or 4 if you consider terry as well. So the dye needs to be rolling, rolling boil, and it really only takes a couple of seconds, minute max, if you have enough dye and not enough water. I never put too much water in there. I always keep the water level really low so that the dye is really nice and intense. Rightio, so finished with the rit. Now we're on to the eye dye poly. And I have mentioned this before, people who buy this one. So it comes in this sort of pack, and it's got like 2 little packs in it. So it's got this one, which is called the color intensifier. I don't actually use this because I think it sort of splodges the finu a little bit, so I don't actually use this. And then this one, even though the pack says it's dissolvable, I wouldn't do that. I've done it in the past, and it really leaves splotches on the finish. So I normally just cut this open, and that's the problem with this dye. Like once it's open, either you use half of it and put the rest into a little plastic jar if you have one, or use the lot. So in this instance, I'm using. Wrong one. Yep. Lot. So this is the blue. And ideally you want to wear gloves with this because it's sort of better get my gloves now. And then you let it come back to the boil. Leave it boiling for a couple of minutes, because this is a powder, so it takes a little bit longer to properly sort of dissolve. Put the lid back on. I put the green in this one in a minute. I'm using the, there we go, the Kelly green. There we go. Open that pack. Give it a bit of a shake. Just use scissors and pop it in. Right, dip and let it come back to the boil for a minute or two, or a bit longer if you like. And then same process as before, like spaghetti, roll them in and stir them as you go. There you go. So I don't wet them down before, I just roll them in. And because of the heat of the liquid, they soften, and depending on your prep of course, they soften pretty quickly. You can already see they take very quick. And just use the tongs. Same on the side. So normally I would have two different pairs of tongs, but because they're both pretty dark colours, I just use one. And see, this one takes really, really quickly as well. Just like the Rit, really. It's sort of the same shade of blue. The Kelly green isn't really as Kelly green as we remember it from the old Rit. It's more on the bluish side, if you can see that. It's yeah, it's definitely, in my book, that's not Kelly green. But for this particular project, customer wants it really on the dark side, the whole wall hanging. That's what it's going to be. That's why I'm doing this in all different shades. So he wants it on the dark side, so for me that is actually perfect. But just bear in mind, this is not Kelly green as we know it from back in the day. You know, the old Rit that we all know, all knew and love, and this is definitely not it. Hello. Right, now basic dye. So again, using the Harakeke that I already prepared, New Zealand Flax. One of my pots is already boiling. And this is a powder dye, so you can, because these comes in these little jars, unlike the packs of the eye dye, so you can actually really measure them if you're really into that scientific thing. I just pop the whole lot in because I need a lot, so I just dump it in and let it come back to the boil. Doesn't take much because it's a powder, different to a liquid, and I let it boil for, you know, a couple of minutes, just so the dye really dissolves in the pot. And I'm just using standard stainless steel pots, by the way, and they only have about that much water in it, so I don't know what that is. I think maybe 5-6 liters max. And because I need a deep color, I put the whole lot in, but if you want a sort of shallower color, only put half, or just half a teaspoon, or, you know, however much you want really. And I'm dyeing a lot, so I used a lot. And then I've got my cold water there to stop the boiling process, because these have been processed before. I mean, you all know this. So these have been processed before, and that means in my case they have been boiled before. So you run the risk of overboiling them if you haven't got the dye strong enough and it takes too long to take. You may risk overboiling them and then they separate. So when working with natural fibers, you have to adjust a little bit. Anyway, so I just pop, I gotta cut these a bit, because I bundle them in twos, so it's just one. And then I roll them in, same as before, like spaghetti. And of all the greens that I've tried today, this is my favorite by far. So ideally you want, you know, give it a little bit of time. Depending on your prep, this may take a minute or two. And then I just use my gloves and a pair of tongs and stir them around. Oops, excuse me. There you go. Pop them in. Just in case you're wondering, in this pot is going to be the blue, because today I'm dyeing all blue and green for a specific project. Right, so now the bottom that went in first is already really dark, and the top is still quite a bit sort of sort of olivey, and that's exactly how I want it. So we have different shades of different color, or sort of different shades of green on one strand, and this is exactly what I want for this particular project. That's one way of achieving it, sort of putting them in earlier and leaving the bottom or the top, depending, in longer. So that's one way of doing it. You can also dip dye, like do the bottom in this color and the top in this color, if that's what you want. So there are different ways of doing this. So if you see, if I just put it in like that, just a little bit, it's a totally different green. Right? So I take this out already because I want a couple of different shades of each color. So that's what we're doing now. And in this one, it's going to go the blue. There we go. The blue goes in this one. And then I still have another couple of dyes, a malachite and a crystal violet, just sort of as highlight for that particular piece that I'm working on. Right, so here are the results. So this one here, this is the red dye more liquid, the green and the blue. Right. This over here is the dye poly, green and blue, and as you can see, the green is actually blue, sort of a bluish. I mean, they're still wet, but it's much brighter in terms of color density and all that sort of thing. And then over here we have the basic dye, blue and green. There you go. And that green is so far kind of my favorite, if it's after green. Having said that, we definitely need, in terms of green, at the moment, I'd recommend the terry. If you want a really sort of a bright green or anything like that. All these three here look more like a forest green, really. Sort of, they're on the bluish side. But that's just my personal opinion. I want them this color for this particular project. But if you want a different color, I'm about to do a malachite as well of the basic dye, and that is sort of a nice sort of almost turquoisey green, really, which is a good alternative.